Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 318 or 318. My name is John O'Logan, and you know what I've been thinking a lot about lately? I've been thinking about the 1990s, and I remember there was a big panic among a lot of people in the 1990s. They were all panicked about what they called the end of history, and the fact that this was the end of history and everything was going to be boring from this point out. And the two biggest stories of the decade were a very nice lady died in a car crash and a sports star turned into a murderer. Yeah. I kind of wish I had more agency back then to enjoy it, but I was, pretty much busy playing Final Fantasy II on my SNES. Unlike today, when I am playing Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster on my desktop PC. How things have changed. Joining me today on the podcast are Zach.
Hello.
And Zach.
It's great to be here.
Zach, I know you at least have some memories of, quote-unquote, the end of history. How about you, Zach? When were you born?
I was born in 1985.
You were born in... Sorry, I asked Zach, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm glad that you dated yourself. I'll date myself, too. 1984. Zach, how about you?
1996.
1996. So you weren't even here for half of the end of history.
It sounded like a great time.
It was a better time than anyone knew. That was an age where people were angry about free trade. Imagine that. Hey, okay, well, sadly, we are not living in the 1990s. We are living in an age that is much closer to the purported Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. So how about we chat about a video game that features some very interesting times based on a classic Chinese novel? So the game we're talking about is something that has been highly anticipated for years now, actually. When was it announced? I can't even remember.
I think it was 2022,
2022. Wow. I remember back then, we all thought it was the end of history. Suikoden I and II HD Remaster, Rune Dunan Unification Wars. So, yeah, the first two Suikoden games have gotten a remaster, and that is extremely exciting for very, very many reasons, especially for Zach.
That's true.
So I'll give you a little bit of history. Suikoden was a PlayStation-era RPG released in, I think, 96 here, and it was one of the first full-fledged RPGs that were available for Sony's debut console, and they nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. Mind you, it doesn't look like what you would imagine a PlayStation RPG looks like, because you probably picture polygons. But this is, good, really amazing pixel art, and a scale that is grander than the Super Nintendo, but it still feels very much nestled between the 16-bit and the 32-bit eras. The inspiration was pulled from a classic Chinese novel called Water Margin, which was about 108 outlaws uniting against a corrupt government. This was followed in the game. There are 108 characters that you can collect to fight against, again, a corrupt government. Suikoden II followed in 1999 in North America, and it kind of did everything that Suikoden did, but better. In my mind, it was a perfect sequel. It picked up on some story threads. There were some recurring characters, but it told a completely brand new story. And my God, they leveled up the story. The story in Suikoden II is genuinely one of the greatest RPG stories ever told. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a commercial disappointment in the West. Both of them were really. Suikoden II, probably because it wasn't made up of polygons, unfortunately. I'm glad it wasn't, don't get me wrong, because it holds up beautifully. But at the time, everyone was like, polygons. So these games are noted for their political narratives, very morally complex questions that are raised throughout it. Who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? Why people are fighting? It's one of the more accurate depictions of war in an RPG. Like in Final Fantasy VI, it's like everyone's at war, but it's really like 7 guys in a cave versus the Empire. This is like full-scale armies fighting each other. And the thing about these games were there were some problems, unfortunately, including the localizations. There were, the usual 1990s bad localizations with grammatical errors, mistranslations. Some things just didn't make sense. Story beats didn't land because they didn't make sense. And after this, of course, we got 3, 4, 5. We got a tactics game. We got a spin-off for the DS. And then it just we didn't get anything else ever. And then these were announced and everyone got very, very excited. So why don't we talk about Suikoden? Zach, last year, you played Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes, which was a spiritual successor to Suikoden, and you walked away feeling you liked it, but you were a little bit disappointed. So let me ask, returning to Suikoden 1 and 2, did it put Eiyuden Chronicles in even sharper relief?
I I made a point not to mention Euden in my review because I know that it's a controversial question, even amongst staff, right? So like yes, the answer to your question is yes. Euden Chronicle, even compared to Suikoden 1, which as you mentioned, is not as well seen from a story perspective or from really any perspective as Suikoden 2 is for most people, still trounces Euden. It reminds me of something that Alex Franachek, who's on our staff, said when he was talking about Lies of P, and he went back to play Bloodborne, and he said it was like going back to the real boy. And it's true. Suikoden is the real boy. It's the stuff. It's what understands how to tell a narrative in a way that is like complex and interesting, but also does not drag. It is the narrative pacing of both games is just brilliant, and everything in these remasters is true to that.
Well, Suikoden 2 is one of your favorite RPGs of all time. Would you say it is your favorite RPG of all time? Like number one?
I think if I take nostalgia and put it over here, I think I would probably say Nier Automata is my favorite. But if I didn't do that, then I would say Suikoden 2 is my favorite. It's what one be for me.
See, I don't think you can put nostalgia aside when it comes to these kind of questions. I don't think you should either, actually. So yeah, you adore this game. You've played them dozens. You played both of them dozens of times. So you got this package, and you were said you have to play through them 1,001 times. And I assume you were not upset about that.
Oh no, and you know. We'll talk about, you know, my criticisms of the remasters themselves, but the reality is that like these are, especially Suikoden 2, two of my absolute favorite games of all time, and they hold up.
Yeah, well, we played them for retro. I have no idea how time passes anymore. Was it a year or two ago?
It was like 3 years ago, I think. Actually,
Christ on a cracker.
Yeah, I understand.
And they held up then. They were great. So, like, I think the reason why these got announced is because we did them on retro. Actually, that's the way it always went. Yeah. That was Solosi's magic. You pick a game, and bam, there it was announced. When these were announced, everyone got really, really excited. Obviously, because for two reasons: one, you know, they're remasters of the beautiful, amazing games, and two, Konami was actually doing something with Suikoden. Or frankly, Konami was doing something. Period. At that point. And I remember instantly thinking about comparisons to the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. Now, those games were astonishingly successful at putting a new coat of paint on those games that you think looked exactly like the old coat of paint until you went back and looked at them. And you realize the Pixel remasters, they have so many quality of life features, but I think the world of the Pixel remasters. This, from what I'm gathering in your review, isn't quite successful to that same level.
I would agree with that. And I've played a few of the Pixel remasters at this point, I think 3. And the reality is that like people are going to be happy with whatever you give them, right? With Suikoden. It's available on a modern console. It plays like it is essentially at the end of the day, at its very core, down at the bottom, it's the same game. And that's great. But there are problems with Suikoden. Suikoden 1 in particular, there are major inventory management problems that are not that complicated to fix, and they don't add to the gameplay. It's not like Suikoden is a challenging game at all. Suikoden is an easy game, really, except for like the fact that you have to spend so much time in menus, right? So like
it's the true boss, really.
Right. One of the criticisms that I have of the first one in particular is like inventory management is a nightmare. And even in like the most recent remaster, like the last game I reviewed was Dragon Quest III, like dungeon crawling and your ability to manage inventory is part of the game. That is absolutely not true with Suikoden 1. And Suikoden 1 is just like a thing you have to do, and it's annoying, and it's not part of it. So like there are quality of life updates to this game. They add fast forward to battles,
which is great.
Although very, very strangely, that's true, but the battles were already really quick. Like that was part of the thing that I always loved about Suikoden 1 and 2. But it speeds up the music, which is like what an emulator would do, which I didn't say in my review because I didn't want to say that. But like, come on, like that's an easy fix.
It's an easy fix, and this is conspiracy time. It's an easy fix unless these new versions were built on top of the old versions.
Oh, I mean, I think they were 100% built on the PSP versions, which we never got in this country, but that have a lot in common with what these games are doing.
It wouldn't surprise me then if these games were essentially running in an emulator, and that's the reason they couldn't fix the audio issues.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. And there are other quality of life features. There's a hard mode, which I played in both games, but like I've played these games so many times that maybe it's just because I know the games. Like it was like, oh, this early game stuff is a little challenging, but by the end, I'm just like wiping the floor with everything. But that's pretty much it in terms of quality of life. Like they offered an autosave function. And I'm not kidding. This is the most strange thing I've ever seen. And I've read a lot of reviews about it at this point, where the autosave only triggers when you walk into a save room. That
seems like a weird choice.
It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it technically saves you about 30 seconds, but...
Right. I still saved every time I walked in. So, like, they make a lot of really strange choices. And, you know, there are a lot of things they do that are great, to be honest. Like, so the look itself, and I know, like, I've already looked online and I've seen people going all over the map on what they think about the look of it. But they've updated the backgrounds, but they haven't touched the sprite work. The sprite work in Suikoden is, especially in Suikoden 2, I think is just like
stunning.
That's it's almost holy. You don't touch that. It's amazing. It's so much of what defines what this game is and what it's been. And the one thing that people have always complained about is the localization, which I think has been a fair criticism, especially with Suikoden 2. There are literally towns in the late game that are not even localized. The town names are just still in kanji in the original game. It's insane. So one of the things they did was they went back to the original English script and they cleaned it up based on the Japanese. I've seen some localizers complain that like that wasn't enough. And then I've seen other people on the internet say like, don't touch my game. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think that it hits it. So like they do some things that are good, but there are plenty of other issues that they don't touch, which I guess we didn't talk about. I've been talking for too long now. I'm sorry.
No, you're not. You're talking about the game. That's great. You're doing what I would be prompting you to do. Okay, let's actually talk for a second about the storyline for a sec, because the Suikoden games are very much, I think they tell a story that RPGs tend to shy away from. Tactical RPGs don't. Tactical RPGs usually do. A lot of them feature war because it's a very easy fit. Whereas Suikoden actually goes into like on the ground the foot soldiers in many cases of the war. It really does face the realities of it in a way that a lot of RPGs don't. And moreover, they do it while juggling over 108 characters in each game. So out of these 108 characters in the first game, let's just focus on the first game for just a second. Out of these 108 characters, how many would you say are actually memorable?
That's a good question. I've never thought about that before. I'd say probably 20 of them are pretty memorable.
And that seems fair to me. That seems like a reasonable number of characters to keep track of.
Yeah, like Flick and Victor. Some people who aren't Stars of Destiny, I think, are very memorable, especially in Suikoden 1, I think in particular. Yeah, I'd say 20 to 25. Yeah.
Okay, how about in 2?
I'd say closer to 50.
And that, I think, is the difference between the two games.
Yeah.
It's representative of the difference between the two games. It's the amount of detail that is in the story, the characterization, and the complex character relationships in 2 is just remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. And I think that getting back to something we were talking about earlier, I think the pixel art is a big part of that. Like the pixel art in 1 is good, but the pixel art in 2 like is so expressive. And they have them move in different ways. They have them like, I think about like some of the character models in Final Fantasy VII sometimes, and I feel like they pulled from that a little bit in terms of the expressiveness of it. And, it isn't like there's a ton more screen time for a lot of those 108 stars, but I think that they do more with the time they have. In Suikoden 2, it's also probably almost twice as long of a game, so that helps.
Yeah, Suikoden 1's not a super long game. I agree with you about the pixel art in this. I think it's very much at the pinnacle of the art form. Another reason why I think this was successful, just looking at screenshots and some video I saw, is that I haven't played these, by the way. I've played both of the originals a few times. Even though the backgrounds and things are redone, the fact that they left the the sprites untouched, or maybe they touched up a little bit, maybe, but they look exactly the same. That I think is a major reason why the character of these remasters seems like it is unchanged from the original. If they had done anything to change those sprites, I think this would have been a very different experience.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, I think to me, like when I think of Suikoden, like in my mind, if I just like think Suikoden, like I'm thinking of like Ryu running through the camp at the beginning of Suikoden 2. And like the thing that is most distilled in my mind is Ryu, the sprite, and all the different iterations of Ryu and Joey and Nanami and all the different things they do with the sprite work. And yeah, I think the sprite work is an underrated element of how important these games are to me and to people in general.
Yeah, I completely understand. I feel the same way about it. The backgrounds being HD and being much more, I guess, modern looking, and you put the sprites against those backgrounds. Did you ever feel like there was a disconnect between the two art styles?
Not really. I know that I am more forgiving of that particular thing than other people. I've seen a lot of people complain about that in games where I'm like, it seemed fine to me. But here, like, even more than like even an HD 2D game, like it seemed like it fit. It wasn't like the backgrounds weren't so upgraded. They did not feel like the original. And I hate to use sort of a cliche phrase, but it's the truth. Like to me, like the backgrounds looked pretty much the way that I remembered them in my head. And the sprite work, which I think was always the key, looked the same because it was the same, but everything else looked the same in the background. And so I didn't see this big contrast. Again, like I know people will disagree with me on this, but to me, they fit.
I think that's one of the reasons why the Pixel remasters worked so well, is because if you look at the screenshots side by side to the originals, yeah, obviously the Pixel remasters look a little different, but they also look kind of how you remember them looking in your mind's eye. And I think this game pulls off a similar trick with how they've updated the graphics, because the game is frankly stunning. Backgrounds are amazing, varied. It feels like a world. A lot of good world building in these games.
I mean, world building is such a huge part of Suikoden. I mean, I think that it's one of those things that you start to see in these games, and it's one of the reasons that I like in my head, like Suikoden 1 and 2. I'm glad they packaged them together because it's never been logical in my head to play one without the other. They're so connected. There's so many connected characters, way more than there are in the rest of the series. And part of that is Mariami leaving, at the end of Suikoden 3. But the world building is established so well in these two games.
One of the problems that you do have with this game, actually, you have a lot of problems with the remastered battles. Specifically, we were talking about the music earlier and the quality of life speed up. Also, you didn't quite like the difficulty options that were presented, or at least the way they implemented difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge problem with it. First of all, like hard mode there's a trophy for it, first of all, which I think I'm never a fan of that, but it's one of those things that you select at the beginning of the game and you can't select out of. And in Suikoden 1, like at the very beginning, there's like a zombie dragon. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't played it, but there's a zombie dragon that is extremely hard. It took me like 6 tries. But other than that, hard mode, if you know what you're doing, especially in Suikoden 2, where you have multiple rune slots, is not hard mode at all. Even the most challenging fight in Suikoden 2, which I won't spoil, but involves 3 teams, still I had no trouble with, because I had the options to deal with it. And so I think that one of the things about hard modes, I think hard modes are hard, but like in this case, it's like just upping the HP value and upping the damage they do at a certain point doesn't deal with the fact that your systems were kind of broken to begin with. And I understand how to deal with your broken systems. And again, it's unfair because like I understand these games. I've played them so many times. I've studied them. I've thought about like the best party. I've really, really, really tried to do perfect runs of this game. And so this time, even with sort of a limited amount of time to do it, I was like, I'm still going to do like these normal things that I do. And then I killed the final boss in 2 rounds. And the only reason it took me 2 rounds is because I forgot which thing I was supposed to target in the last round. So it doesn't really fix, it doesn't actually make the games hard, except for in like the very early beginnings of Suikoden 1.
I feel like the trick about these games, especially 2, is that the first time someone plays it might be harder than every other time, simply because there are a lot of there are a lot of ways to break the game in terms of your setup and your party composition and the techniques they use. And once you know those, they are a completely fair way to play the game. But maybe if someone who had never played it before, they might find it a little bit more difficult because they don't know how to break the game.
That's fair. And I think I think that anybody who first, if you've never played Suikoden before, my honest advice is try it on hard mode, because the games themselves are pretty trivial if you play them on normal. And I'm not even saying this is a difficulty hound, which I know I am, but play them on hard mode because they will at least put up some resistance and force you to think about the systems of the game a tiny bit.
Yeah, because an RPG without challenge is almost a visual novel, which is a slightly different experience.
They have two of those in the Suikoden series as well.
Yes, the Suikoden series has a variety. I'm actually stunned they don't have a dating sim with 108 possible suitors.
I would do that.
I'm a little surprised they haven't actually done that. The soundtrack here, you say it's the same as always. They didn't touch it. Do you kind of wish they did?
No. In terms of the music, I mean, like it's hard for me. I tried to make this clear in the review, like who I am as an individual who's reviewing it. Like, I don't want them to touch the music. The music is my music. Don't touch it. It's mine. The sound effects are updated. And one of the things I said in my review as well is that some things were patched in at the last second for me. And the sound effects were stronger, like a little bit more clear. Definitely the menu music was, the menu sounds were better from the original, but it got patched in within 6 hours before the review published. So there was no way I could have talked about that, but sound effects are better, but the music is generally the same.
Okay. You mentioned off the top that, actually, I'm curious who the staffer was you were talking to. You don't have to say if you don't want to.
It was Alex.
It was Alex. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alex asked, I have access to these games. Should I pick these up? And your response by the end is, yeah, you should, because it's vegan. If it's not Alex and it's somebody else, what do you think would be the biggest reason for someone to pick up these games, this particular version?
It's localization. I mean, the visuals are nice, and you're going to be sort of up or down on the visuals, but the localization is definitely the reason to do it. And people for years have talked about the localization of Suikoden II in particular as being unfinished. This is a finished localization. Again, some localizers I know, some of whom have worked for the site before, Derek Heemsberger, and if you want to go look at what he's saying on Blue Skies, thinks that this localization doesn't go far enough, as that it should have gone back to the OG Japanese. But this one just goes to the original English script and it fixes it. It makes it legible. It makes it understandable. And it doesn't really lose any of the original personality. There are a couple of things, like at some point, Tur in Suikoden 1 could say, like, I don't wanna to the emperor of the entire nation. Like, that's funny, but it's not realistic. And so they eliminate some of that, but they still maintain most of the personality of people like Victor in particular, who I think is a highlight of both games. And it's localization, regardless of anything else. Like the new character art in Suikoden 1 is great. It looks great. It's done by the original character artist, so you can't cry, woke or whatever. It looks great. And so, yeah, I think it's a localization, period.
My last question to you is, I don't want to get your hopes up here, but do you kind of hope that the release of these two games might be a sign that Konami is thinking about revisiting other past titles in this series, including 3, 4, 5, maybe the tactics game, maybe the DS game?
I think the chances of that are low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think that
unfortunately,
in like sort of the last 25 years, Suikoden 2 in particular has taken on this cult classic status. If you go back and look at RPG fan reviews from the time it came out, that was not true. Even our staffers were like 83, not as good as the first. But it has grown in stature to, being one of the great RPGs of all time. And so I think that along with the Euden hype has allowed them to sort of move back into the IP, but we already know what they're going to do, right? They're going to release a mobile game, which is a prequel to Suikoden 1. And which I'm going to play because I'm a sucker. but it's going to be a gotcha game. I'm sure you're going to have to pay $25 to pull Ryu at some point. And I don't know. I have not that much faith in late stage capitalism. I don't know. I'm excited that they're revisiting it. I'm excited they're pulling out a new anime for Suikoden II. I'm excited they're pulling out a new gotcha game, but I don't think that either of those will be super successful. And if they wanted to be successful, they would need to make a real Suikoden 6 that appeals to their real audience, which is people who are like our age, you and I, Jono. And people who are our age, you and I, Jono, aren't interested in gotcha games. We want a real console RPG that plays like Suikoden 1 and 2. You release that, like a Suikoden 6, you're going to get something. You release a gotcha game, at least in the West, and unless you're a sucker like me, you're going to say, screw you, and you're going to say no thanks, and then the series is dead again. I think it is literally just a crescendo from the hype from Eiyuden, and I think it will die in the next year, is my honest and very sad opinion.
Yeah, but you want to know what? Even if it does die, we did get these remasters out of them.
That's true.
And these now anyone can play these games. And like Suikoden 2, for those who aren't aware, is one of the most difficult titles to find in PlayStation history as a modern day gamer. Like it was limited print, not a whole lot of copies get out there, and it's really, really expensive.
It's my prized possession.
Yeah. So even when it became vaguely available in digital, it was still pretty high up there. So the fact that there are now literally an all-in-one way to play this on any console you want is really exciting.
I mean, I want to be very clear. These are the best ways to play Suikoden 1 and 2. Suikoden 2 is, in my opinion, one of the best RPGs ever made. If you've never played these games, play them. Play them, play them, play them. Buy them. Make Konami know that we're interested. Make my prediction wrong. I would love it if I was wrong. I've never wanted to be more wrong in my whole life, and I hate being wrong. Play them. They're excellent.
I agree. Oh, incidentally, anyone out there, follow Derek on Blue Sky, because Derek posts some good stuff on Blue Sky.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Zach, for plowing through two very, very long games. Even if you played them multiple times in the past, this was a new experience. So I appreciate you taking the time to get through them all.
No, thank you for letting me do it.
Oh, jeez, my pleasure. Let's move on now to Suikoden is technically a long-running series, but Monster Hunter is a long-running series that has regular installments released. So let's pivot onto this. So Monster Hunter Wilds. Just a little bit of background here. The Monster Hunter series debuted on the PlayStation 2 back in the early 2000s. Basically, the entire conceit of the game was you hunt massive, animals. And it was, as I understand it, a success in Japan, and it was big enough success to get sequels. And generally what Capcom did is they created this on and off again cycle where they would release a mainline title for consoles, then for portable, then consoles and portable, and it gained a lot of popularity in Japan, but it still struggled to get a foothold in Western markets. And eventually it caught, possibly because of its popularity on the 3DS, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. More accurately, like the big one was Monster Hunter World in 2018. It was released on PCs and home consoles, opened the door to many players who have never played it before. And Monster Hunter became a just huge success in the West. The series is not just known for games, lots of other things are anime. And I think, is there a movie? I think there's a movie, isn't there? I've heard it's terrible. Anyway, so now we have a brand new game in the series, Monster Hunter Wilds. And we got Zek to review it. And Zek, let's talk about it for a second. So everyone was really anticipating this because it's, the new Monster Hunter game. From what I have read in your review and elsewhere, it sort of feels like, I don't even want to say one step forward, two steps back, maybe one step forward and one step back, in the sense that I think it sounds like they tried to make it appeal to a lot more people. And in doing so, they kind of limited the appeal to longtime fans. Would that be fair?
So I would say I'm a lot more excited about what it could be over what it currently is, if that makes sense. I think they're leaning a little bit too much in the live service angle, which they've done for the previous two games, but I think it's even more so with this one, where they're releasing regular updates.
Yeah, because DLC is a big component of these games, and actually not even DLC, more just regular updates. It's for a game that's not an MMO, it does have a very MMO feel to it in a way about how they handle that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised at how little content there was. I wasn't expecting the most amount of content right at release, but for example, I didn't interact with the gear system very much at all. I just kept the base gear and just beat every single monster in one attempt. I didn't struggle on anything, and it was just over.
Yeah, I'm not even going to pretend that we gave you the game, and we were like, here you go, you have a couple weeks, and you came back like 2 or 3 days later, and been like, yep, done. And I was like, what? How? Well, huh? And you were like, yeah, finished it. It's done. I still have to, there's end game stuff, but the main story, it's complete. And it was like, wow, that was surprisingly quick.
I think the main story actually only took it took less than 1 day. It was basically I received the code and then I was just already done. Like the credits were rolling before the day was over.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's kind of crazy, but let's put it this way. Even though the story is, shall we say, brief, that does not necessarily mean that your time with the game is going to be brief. For example, you spent dozens of hours in the game earning the Platinum Trophy. So there's a lot of game to enjoy here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think compared to most games, it's longer. I guess compared to RPGs, it's probably a similar length, but compared to even Base, World, and Rise, in terms of getting the Platinum Trophy, it's much shorter.
Okay. I'm curious about the story here because brief as it is, it's still the conceit that's holding the game together. Generally, Monster Hunter narratives have taken a back seat to the campaign. What is the story here?
So the story is basically you're in what's called the Forbidden Lands, which is, I'm not a Monster Hunter story expert, but it's just this new area that I assume they talked about in previous games. And there are certain villages that are they lived in harmony with the area and the monsters, but there have been issues lately, and you kind of find out what the source of these issues are, which would go into spoiler territory. But
the thing about the story of Monster Hunter games, as I understand it, is, like I said, they really do play they're a vehicle for the central gameplay mechanic, the central gameplay loop, which is you put your stuff together, you get your party together, you upgrade your stuff, you head out into the wilds, you find the monster that you're hunting, you kill the monster you're hunting, and then you take stuff back to town, and you repeat that cycle over and over again. Something that I found striking about your review is that you said that in your first run, you found upgrading your gear completely unnecessary, which to me seems like it would damage the key gameplay loop, which is, beat the monster, come back to town, beat the monster, come back to town. If you didn't need to upgrade your gear, how did that impact your experience?
So I noticed that there was no point to upgrading gear because I was just destroying every single monster in 4 minutes. Right? It's almost a waste to go back and grind a monster for parts to upgrade gear when you can just power through the entire game. And I had this problem even in endgame where I went straight to the hardest monster with barely any upgrades, and I still just completely destroyed it. And I used that monster to get the best gear that I can get at this point. So the entire playthrough, I just use basically the base gear or just very weak gear and just skipped all the way to end game gear.
I don't want to criticize that, but that seems weird to me that the balance of the game was that off, that you could literally just skip an entire central mechanic of the game.
I was a little bit worried about that because when I was writing my review, I was thinking, is it just me?
Zach, I know the feeling 100%. When you get an advanced code and there's nothing online and you're like, oh God, this is something that's going to be controversial and no one's going to agree with. And then it comes out and you're like, oh no, I was right. Everyone's on the same page about this. But it's kind of, it's nerve wracking when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, I was glad that certain other publications had similar experiences.
Despite the fact that, frankly, it sounds like the difficulty is a little bit easy, but you did mention that the monster hunting itself was actually some of the best in the series.
Yes, so the monsters are I think they're trying to do more with them, just mechanically, just in terms of size, in terms of how they interact with the environment. And I think the dynamic weather system is just incredible. I think the game has the best foundation. So like after a few updates, it could be the best in the series, and especially with the expansion. I'm very much like excited for the expansion because they do a lot more with what's currently there.
Okay, well, let's talk about the expansions for a second, or at least the potential expansions. Where do you think these potential expansions could expand the game into a much more, I don't want to say satisfying, into a much grander experience for a lot of players, and hopefully especially veteran players of the series?
So I think, first of all, the monsters need to be more challenging. I think there needs to be at least that one monster where you really want to upgrade your gear for, where you feel rewarded for interacting with all the gameplay systems. It just does not exist in the base game, so that's kind of my one main criticism.
Yeah, it strikes me that the Monster Hunter series every single fight shouldn't feel like an encounter in a Souls-like, but at the same time, I think that possibly, especially endgame monsters should probably have a little bit of that feel at the least. Like you have to keep coming back to them and learning their patterns and things like that. Like you can't just beating them after 4 minutes. That's not really the most fulfilling experience, I imagine.
Yeah, I don't want to say I was disappointed with the experience because I had a great time, especially fighting them the first time, because you don't know what their patterns or mechanics will be. But the problem is, even doing it the first time, I had no issues at all. Like they were just that easy.
It seems like the end game, especially you mentioned in the review, it seems like the end game lacks some depth.
Yes, very much so. The end game could last you like less than an hour if all you care about is just beating the strongest monsters.
And that's possibly a result of the live service model that is being, I don't want to say imposed on the game, because I mean, there's always been a multiplayer-esque component to the Monster Hunter series, so it should be a natural fit. But it feels from everything I've read from your review and everything you said, it just feels a little bit bare bones.
Yes, and that's the problem with reviewing this game in particular, because I can't give it like a very high score because of what it could be, right? I can only review what is currently there.
And unfortunately, what is currently there in one particular case is what is there are some significant performance issues. Now, you reviewed this on the PlayStation 5, but you also got to experience some of it on the PS5 Pro. So certainly, we're not like this isn't a matter of hardware. You were using the cutting edge of hardware, and even still, you kind of were forced to play it in performance mode in order to actually for it to play properly.
So on the PS5 Pro, balance mode is usually fine, but if you go up to like resolution mode, it's basically a slideshow. Like I don't know why it's even there. It's like you're playing a PowerPoint.
That's embarrassing because it's the PlayStation 5 Pro.
Yeah, and on PS5 you have to drop it down to performance mode because it's it's a very gameplay driven game. It's not like a turn-based RPG where like a lower frame rate is fine. And on performance mode, it just does not look good. Like to me, it looks like a Vita game. So.
Oh my god, that is. I don't. Oh, that is bad. I mean, I don't want to come off as I do. I think I come off as a Nintendo Switch basher on this podcast. I'm not, but like, even when games on the Nintendo Switch have some bad frame rates, I would never say they are like slideshows. And the fact that it's on the PlayStation 5, which theoretically is the most advanced cutting edge console currently sold today, that's weird.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Like I try to look into a bit more. I know they're doing a lot with the world and everything, like the dynamic weather system. There's like even down to the like tiny wildlife like bugs. I don't know how that I guess interacts with the wider system, like how it affects the frame rate and everything. But
yeah, because you experience some other technical issues in this game as well, such as bugs, pathing problems, crashes, things like that.
Yeah, I did not expect those issues. They're not like you can still have a good experience despite all that, and you might not even experience some of that because I did interact with all of the end game and went further than a lot of other people. But I definitely did notice like significant issues that you could replicate. So
okay, the way I was describing it earlier as bare bones, there is another way to describe it, which is a much more positive way of describing it, which is as a foundation. And you did not dislike this game at all. You gave it an 86. 86 is a great score. The internet doesn't know what the hell it's talking about when it comes to 80s. I think based on what you're saying in the review and talking to you here, you're saying that with the live service model in place, you can really see this game evolving and getting stronger and better over the next few years.
yes, I definitely think it could be the best in the series. I think in 2 years, if I could review this in 2 years, it would be likely be in the 90s, right? But I can't right now. But I think the foundation is there to create one of the best gameplay focused RPGs I've ever played, and I'm very excited for the expansion.
Well, you hold like you say in the review, you have incredibly high expectations for the franchise. And just because Wilds didn't live up to those expectations fully does not mean that it is a bad game, or does not mean that it didn't live up to some of those expectations.
Right. I think the foundation definitely lived up to and even exceeded some of my expectations. I think it was the most fun I've had in a long time, doing some of those quests. I think it was just too brief, and there were other issues dragging it down.
I think what you said in your bottom line is perfectly apt here, not just because Monster Hunter is known for its surprisingly delicious looking cooking, but also it's just, you say, has all the right ingredients, but they're not fully cooked yet.
Yes, and I wanted to include the yet there because I think they will be cooked in time, just not right now.
Well, let's pivot for a sec. Usually at this point we do a discussion question, but we're going to do something a little bit different today because there is another game, very highly anticipated game, that kind of came out of nowhere last year, and everyone's, what is this? What is this? This looks incredible. And previews have just come out for it. It's coming out, in about a month and a half from now. And this is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And this was a hands-on preview that Zek did for us. And I think it's fair to say that your experience with this essentially, it's a demo. It's a fairly expansive demo, but it's a demo, was extremely positive.
I was not expecting that at all. The first time I finished it, I was when it was clear that it was ending, I was just thinking no, don't end. Not yet. I want to see more.
Yeah. Well, Clair Obscur is Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which is one of those titles which makes you go, wow, that is a challenge for the marketing department. It is a turn-based RPG, and it's from Sandfall Interactive. This is their first game, which is remarkable considering from the screenshots and from the footage that I've seen, the level of polish and care that's here is quite amazing. They're a French video game company. And what's even more amazing than that is this is their first game, and they have a ridiculous cast. Andy Serkis is in it. Charlie Cox, currently in Daredevil, the new Daredevil series on Disney Plus, is in it. That is amazing. And they've created this incredible dark fantasy world that has elements of our own, but in the future. And it twists things. It has this captivating visual style. Let me ask, when the first time you turned on the game and you saw this, what was your reaction to it?
Final Fantasy 13, I think, but a more, obviously, a modern generation version of that. I think the aesthetic is very much either 10 or 13, but just that kind of majestic feeling you get, if that makes sense.
Looking at the screenshots, I feel like this from 10 as well. Beautiful dystopia, or beautiful post-apocalypse, kind of like something bad happened in the past, but it looks like things have started to heal and it's beautiful now, but you can still see remnants. In the case of 10, of course, Zanarkand, but in the case here, you can see a twisted Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, you can see pieces of Paris in these images.
Yeah, so that was my initial impression. There are some differences once you get later into it, but with a preview, it's hard not to do a preview without comparing it to another game, right? So that was my impression.
Well, the comparison that stood out to me more so than Final Fantasy 13 was you compared it to Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Now, looking at this, that is not the title I would immediately think of, but it is a key part of the battle system.
Yes. So I guess I started my preview with that as kind of the hook because it's very, that was my impression, and I didn't really know what to think at first because the gameplay is very like timing based. It's like Paper Mario, but just like souped up, right? Like if you get your timing down, you get like rewarded with so many different effects, like damage over time, like just more resources for your next turn. But if you fail your timing, you're punished a lot more. Like certain bosses will just one shot you regardless of the difficulty if you fail to like parry or dodge an attack. So it rewards you for just performing.
Yeah, so there are some stakes here. The button prompting extreme effects, or being punished for it, reminded me a fair bit of from the footage I saw of Yakuza Like a Dragon, or I guess to a lesser extent, Infinite Wealth. But there you can like move around. But button presses that almost Paper Mario, well, not actually Paper Mario, Super Mario RPG. One of the reasons it's so famous and why it was so beloved is because it brought in a more active feel to the turn-based battle system. It's not just select and they do the thing. It's like you select what you want to do, and then you can impact that afterwards. It creates a much more active, engaging feel into the combat, I think.
Right. You have to learn the fight. You can't just, I guess, learn. Well, you have to learn like how your different abilities for each character, and you have to learn the nuances of each encounter. You can't just select the right commands and like win every battle that way.
Yeah, I remember I was going through a number of the previews on YouTube because I was trying to get a feel for what it looked like. And one of the things that struck me about the combat was you have your usual attack, but you also have long range attacks. And rather than just use them, you have to aim them.
Yes. So different monsters have weak spots where you can deal significant damage if you hit them. Not every monster has them, so that's kind of another element to the gameplay.
I have to admit, when I first saw the footage of this in the I don't even remember what show it was. It was probably not E3 at some point last year. My instant reaction was, okay, this looks good, but I was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop because I was like, this is weird. Like, it has this astounding cast and it's coming out of nowhere. Like, there has to be something wrong with it. And then when we got the code, I remember specifically asking you, I was like, this can't be good, right? Like, this has to be like, it can't be as good as it looks. And based on your preview and everything you've said, it might just be as good as it looks.
I am generally pretty cynical as well. So, especially if it's a first effort, because companies often don't nail it on the first effort, right? So that was my stance. Like I had to, borrow a pretty powerful PC to kind of play this properly. But I think the performance was great, like on that PC.
Yeah, because the graphics in this game, it looks like it really gnaws on your graphics card.
Yes, it definitely does. I think there's a lot of like ray tracing and special effects, so I can see why they needed like a high spec PC.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway that I had from reading your preview is that you didn't want to stop. You reached the end and you said, "Oh no, that's it," and then you started again. Just because you wanted to spend more time in this world with these characters, exploring this world and experimenting with this battle system, seeing where else you can go. Because you say that initially it seems very much like it's what you said, Final Fantasy 13. It seems very linear, but then it starts. It's not.
Yeah, I was surprised at how much I discovered, like especially on my second playthrough when I was kind of taking my time with each area. There are like hidden encounters, and these are like excellent bosses. They're not just like throwaway content. And I like how they just approached everything. Like it's not just like a quest that's in your face with a bunch of UI, right? You really have to explore the area to discover it for yourself.
Which is a lovely thing to find in an RPG, especially one that you think is going to be a corridor simulator and then turns out not to be.
Right. So that definitely subverted my expectations.
I really can't wait to see what the reception of the full game is. Despite reading this preview and talking to you, there's a little voice in the back of my head that says, this can't be this good, right? It just can't be. And every indication says that it looks like it's gonna be. And if they pull it off, that is one hell of a coup.
So one minor critique, I guess, I have, which I was very kind in the preview because, it's a slice of the game. So the story didn't make a whole lot of sense to me because you're kind of starting at a certain point in the game, and they were very clear about this in the documents, right? So I was very lenient about that, but I didn't mention the story itself too much because I just didn't know what the greater motivations are. So that's something I would like to explore in the final game.
It seems like it's much more a demo in the sense to show you a little bit of the world, a little bit of the gameplay, some of the characters, but you don't get very much context about what's actually happening here, which I imagine is by design because they probably don't want spoilers to get out.
Right. So many things could change in the preview, like in the story department. Like it could be some of the best I've seen, or there could be some questions.
Yeah, or who knows? Like the scenes that you saw might not even be in the final game. It might have been bespoke just for this. Like we just don't know yet.
Right. It was a very polished preview, and I could tell that it was very much curated for reviewers.
Which, fair enough. They want to put their best foot forward, and it certainly seems like they did it. I am so excited to see where this thing goes. I was before. I was curious, and now I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. And it's going to be hitting April 24th. So people are going to be coming. They're going to pick it up on April 24th, and they're going to be, based on what I've read, it's going to be a fairly lengthy experience. They're going to be coming out of this game straight into Not E3, which will be an interesting time. So this might be a part of the conversation for longer than a lot of games are, simply because of the timing of release.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, I am too. And I am very excited to share with everyone on here about ways to support RPG Fan. That was not my smoothest transition in the world, but
better than any of mine, I promise.
Oh, you'll get there. Don't worry. So if you are looking for a way to support us at RPG Fan, we've opened up a store. You can find, actually, screw this. Thank you both for coming on. I'll do this in a second after I thank you both for coming on the show and for certainly playing through the games. I really, really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you plowing through, in Zach's case, 2 massive games. In Zach's case, one game that is unfortunately not long enough, and one that he wishes were much longer.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Support. If you want to buy something at our store, you can find our store at www.rpgfan.com/shop. Lots of things in there, mugs, t-shirts. You can also find our collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, the RPG Fan Review Card Collection. And that is a showcase of nearly 300 of our review cards, as you can see on Instagram, Blue Sky, or your social media platform of choice. Another way to support us here is to check out our past episodes of the podcasts. So you are listening to Random Encounter. In the last episode, we were chatting about Avowed with Jerry. I got a chance to talk about Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. And I really wanted to mention that about a week and a half ago, we had a special episode of Random Encounter, Canadian Encounter. And this was featuring a panel of all Canadians, including myself, focusing on Canadian-made RPGs and adventure games. For probably obvious reasons to people listening, this was a very important episode to everyone on that podcast, and especially to me. So, well, not especially to me, but I guess especially to me because I was the one who, hosted it. But if you would like to support us, give that episode a listen. And by support us, I don't mean Random Encounter, I mean Canada. Over at Retro Encounter, last week was the first episode focusing on Tales of Grace's F. Zach, how did it go?
I think it's pretty good. Mike Solosi comes back, so if you want to hear him again, he's there.
Mike Solosi is back?
Yes, he's on the episode. Yeah.
Wow. Whatever happened to Solosi? Solosi also on Blue Sky if you wish to follow someone who keeps you updated with all of the games that he is playing, and he is playing numerous games. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fans' music podcast. In the last episode, the panel chatted about the music of another one of Zach's favorite series, Xenoblade, the Xenoblade Chronicles. So if you want to listen to that, download it, but also check out the two-parter that came before that, which was focusing on the best music of 2024. Really, really great episodes and some fantastic music there. If you'd like to get in contact with us here, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future episode themes, if you have any ideas for discussion questions, anything you'd like to share with us, fire it off. Love to hear from you. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. You can also find me at Blue Sky at johnologan.bsky.social. Zach, where can we find you online?
The best way is just email zachw@rpgfan.com, or I'm also on our Discord as ZachW.
Cool. And Zach?
You can find me on Discord. It's a tentative user.
All right. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. Help us get the word out there. And you can rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Again, Zach, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. It's Thursday night. You got one more day to the weekend, folks.
I'm excited about that.
That's the sound of a teacher right there.
At least this time of year, that's for sure.
Oh God, yeah, it's March. Oh God, school's good. Oh yeah, these kids are going to be eating themselves pretty soon,
or eating me, one or the other.
Oh, that's disturbing. Zach Hunter Wilds. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and everyone out there listening, whatever you're playing, have fun.